Well, good morning. This is very much like the forum in the parish hall in that we are starting about a minute late. Thank you all for joining us. The focus of our conversation is going to be largely around the topics that were in the newsletter special edition that went out on Thursday. I'll get to that in a couple of minutes. There will be an opportunity for question and answer, and I can explain that when we get to it. But to begin, I would like to call on Junior Warden Margaret Moorman to open us with a prayer.
Thank you, Will. Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, ruler of all things in heaven and earth, hear our prayers for this parish family. Strengthen the faithful, arouse the careless, and restore the penitent. Support and guide us all, clergy and laity, as we learn how to be your church in these times. Show us how to care for each other and for those who are suffering in any way. And especially, Lord, we pray you will give us vision and courage to stand boldly for your truth in this constant struggle against racism. Forgive us our blindness and open our eyes, our ears, and our hearts so that we may be your people doing your work in this parish, in Charlottesville, and in the world. Grant us all things necessary for our common life, and bring us all to be of one heart and mind within your holy church. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Margaret. So we're going to begin with a brief update from the Senior Warden, Phil Lamar.
Good morning. So this vestry year, very early, we were confronted with the pandemic. And so that sort of gave us some idea of things that we needed to do. And early on, we started making calls to parishioners to talk to them about what's going on in their lives and to sort of keep a sense of a cohesive congregation in a time when we couldn't gather. We also then, one of the vestry members, Ann Lover, put together a list of people who would make deliveries to people who needed help with groceries or pharmaceuticals. Jerry Seidman put together a group that would provide photographic information and writings to Alice and John for posting on daily updates to the congregation. John Frazee put together what we called the St. Paul's Friends and Neighbors, a small group that got together. And then Margaret put together organized the morning prayers that we are having. So those are some of the things we did to deal with the pandemic and keeping the church together. So on another front, on a more regular vestry task, the nominating committee decided to get started early this year. We're underway in doing that. And in doing that, we this year are going to start letting people know more about what vestry does, what we're doing, and to maybe start involving people who are interested in vestry service and participating in things that we're doing. And we will be also providing orientation to people who are agreed to do the vestry service. So that is what I have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phil. And thank you for helping coordinate all those efforts on the part of so many vestry members. And thank you for updating us on them. And we're going to go now back to Junior Warden Margaret Mormon for a brief update from her perspective.
Well, actually, my perspective is coming primarily from my role as the chair of the Adult Formation Task Force. And I am very pleased to tell you that we have completed our task. Our work is done. Our report's been given to Will and also to Mark, who's now the designated clergy liaison for adult formation. And once they and the vestry have had their chance to comment on it, then the report will be made available to everyone in the parish. We are really very grateful for all the wonderful input that you gave us through surveys and listening sessions and in our interviews. And we do believe you will find yourself well represented in this report. Of course, as we were just beginning to write the report, we found that we also had to consider the changes wrought by this pandemic, the lessons we were and are learning from the enforced innovations in our previously settled ways of being church, and what all of that might mean for adult formation now and in the future. So all of that's in there too. It has been a rare privilege and a pleasure to undertake this work with Leslie and Peter and Tim, Melanie and Virginia, and we are delighted to be able to pass the baton now on to Mark and to the newly forming Adult Formation Committee. So thank you all.
Thanks, Margaret. So, as I said, I'm going to give a quick update that's partly recap and partly elaboration on what was in the Thursday special edition newsletter. I'm going to try to do that quickly so that we can get to questions and answers. And if you have questions, the way you're going to share those is through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you don't see a little thing that says Q&A, you probably need to move your cursor down there and it'll pop up. And if you click on Q&A, you can type in your question. When we get to that point, Parish Administrator John Reed, who is in partnership with Alice Fitch, is running this webinar, will read questions aloud for everybody to hear, and then I will either do my best to respond or refer the question to a staff member or one of the wardens. They will be here as panelists, including Mark and Peyton, who has just joined us after being in a Sunday school meeting since the service ended a little while ago. And I believe Deke will be here as a panelist also. But let me begin with where I began in the Thursday special edition update, which is in this time of being apart from each other physically, there are been a lot of questions about where we are and where we're going. And so the foremost among those questions has been along the lines of, when will we be back in church, in person? What will that look like? How will it work? And so I do want to start there. I have been participating since the suspension of public worship every week in calls with the bishop and the clergy of the diocese to talk about her perspective and where we are as a diocesan community in terms of in-person worship, to go over changing guidelines, new research, and longer-term planning. So what the diocese has done is to establish guidelines that relate to health districts in the state. So we in Charlottesville are in the Thomas Jefferson Health District. And we are tracking new COVID-19 cases in that health district, as well as hospitalizations and deaths, and we are looking for a downward trend. The first confirmed case in our health district was diagnosed on the 17th of March, so it's been more than 90 days. And unfortunately, although there's been quite a few ups and downs, yesterday was the 5th highest total for daily count of new cases since the thing began. So we've seen several days in a row, more than once, we've seen several days in a row of very low numbers. But so far, those streaks of low numbers continue to be punctuated by large numbers. So we have not begun to establish the downward trend that we would need in order to be eligible to apply for the bishop's approval. To apply, we need to submit our plan for reopening. We've done a lot of work on that plan. Some of that is in the newsletter, having to do with distances and entry and exit and face masks. But we do not appear to be very close to being eligible to submit that plan. Without getting too deep into those details, although we will take questions on it, I would just want to refer to the guiding principles. The first, of course, being safety. I thought the bishop did a great job several weeks ago in describing her approach when she said that in these circumstances, there are places that we need to go and things that we need to do where we evaluate whether or not we're willing to accept the risk. For example, if you go to a grocery store, you are accepting some level of risk. And she contrasted that with what it means to create risk. Which is what we would be doing by inviting large numbers of people into our churches. So safety is the first principle. In our reopening plans at St. Paul's, another guiding principle is the principle of inclusion. We do not want to reopen in such a way that we create divisions among our parish. We don't want to say to large numbers of parishioners, oh, well, you can't come, you don't feel safe, you have risk factors. But we've got enough people who are willing and able to come that we'll just move on without you. That's not the nature of our parish community. It's not the nature of Christian fellowship. So one of the things we have been working on is how to include in the longer term, once we are able to reopen the doors, how we're able to include in our worship life people who will not be coming through those doors anytime soon. And so I referred in the newsletter to the possibility we don't have the technology in place, but we are working on exploring what it would mean to be able to bring video and sound into the church as well as out to people at home, so that perhaps readers or prayer leaders might be at home. So safety and inclusion. The other thing we want to avoid is going backwards. We don't want to jump to reopening so soon that we don't want to allow much chance, although you can never eliminate it, but we don't want to allow much chance that we would have to put all those new practices and protocols in place for a couple of weeks and then retreat and close the building again. So for that reason, we're being cautious. The last thing I want to say about the caution, if you're paying attention to the state and the governor, you will quickly conclude that we are moving more slowly and more cautiously than the state. I see two reasons for that. One is that we are not under political pressure to get the economy going again. That's not what we're about. But perhaps more importantly, we have a different population than the Commonwealth of Virginia. So in all the reopening guidelines that you see from civic authorities, they are at pains to say, just because this is happening, it doesn't mean that people who are at high risk should go along or participate in the kinds of activities and gatherings that will be little by little allowed to happen. And the fact is that at St. Paul's, we just have a much higher proportion of our community who are in high risk categories, including age, than the population at large. So for all those reasons, again, we are moving cautiously in order to prioritize safety and inclusion and not having to take a step backwards once we take a step forwards. So the next topic that I want to mention, it's probably the second most frequent question I get, is how are things going financially at St. Paul's? And I never would have, I would not have imagined that I would be saying this, but we are in just fine shape financially, and that is truly a testament to to the commitment and the spiritual vitality of this parish. There are churches, and I know from being on calls with the bishop, there are churches in our diocese where we're having conversations at St. Paul's about what can we do, how can we adjust with our mission and service budget in order to relieve some of the economic pain of some of our neighbors in new ways and stronger ways. There are parishes in the diocese where they're having conversations about how to help their clergy take advantage of unemployment benefits. So we're in good shape. And I am grateful to God, and I am grateful to you for the fact that that many parishioners have given special gifts, have increased their pledges, have made pledge payments early, to such a degree that, of course, the plate income is down because we're not passing plates Sunday by Sunday. But that has been more than offset, so that in total, our revenue to date is ahead of what we had projected it would be on January 1st, which is before the pandemic. So we're in great shape financially, and I just can't emphasize enough that, to me, that that is not just good fortune. That is a sign of spiritual commitment and vitality, and I find it very moving. I also want to say a number of people have asked, are we eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program? And the answer to that is no. We would have to certify, in order to qualify for that program, that we are unable to continue operations without it. And that's just not the case. What we are eligible for is a payroll tax forgiveness program, essentially, that is designed for businesses and institutions that are not eligible for the Paycheck Protection Program. So we believe that that is going to result in approximately $30,000 of unanticipated revenue. The Finance Committee has recommended to the vestry that the entire sum of that unanticipated revenue be devoted to mission and service budget for immediate local emergency needs in the year 2020. That's just one. That's one of several things that we're doing to try to respond to the economic pain around us. Under staffing, there are updates on all the staff in the newsletter that went out Thursday, but the headline items go all the way back a couple of years to the mutual ministry review, where mission and service and adult formation were identified as priority areas for new attention, new initiatives, new programming, and for staff attention. And so I am delighted to have reached a point where we can identify University Chaplain, Associate Rector Mark Wassler as the staff leader for adult formation, and Peyton Williams, our Director of Children's and Youth Ministries, as the staff leader for mission and service. They'll be on this call. They are on this call for questions and answers about that. Some of the rationale for those decisions is in the newsletter that went out Thursday. I'm very excited about it, and I hope that many of you will be also. And the next big category, it has to do with our building plans. We spent a lot of time before the pandemic talking about our vision for the future of our facilities. We've talked, and I think most of the parish is aware of the consensus that's been reached through a lot of study and a lot of consultation and a lot of discussion over the last couple of years, which is that the old part of our building, the 1926 building, which includes the nave and the parish hall and the library, that piece is in need of restoration, but it is well built. It is a landmark, and it is ready for and deserving of a loving restoration. What's a little more complicated is the newer parts of our facilities, which include the office corridor and offices, which are in the sort of half basement along Chancellor Street, and the Sunday school building. Both of those pieces were built at the same time in 1959 as a faithful response to the needs of the church. The church was growing and thriving, and our forebears of that time responded boldly by building those two sections. Those two sections, however, 60 years on, have not aged well. They are, in case of the office wing, the roof is failing. It's a flat roof, and the concrete has begun to sag. And in the case of the church school wing, the brick is failing. And it's a building that would be extremely difficult to renovate because of accessibility. It doesn't have an elevator, and the floors don't line up with the other floors in the building. And it's difficult to reconfigure because the walls are load-bearing cinder block walls. And on top of all that, both of those pieces are full of what was a new wonder material in the 50s, which was asbestos. So we have known for a while, and we've talked about this in the parish, that whether we were to renovate or rebuild, all of that asbestos would need to go away. And we, the vestry last month, voted to move forward with that project. And I am grateful. I am excited. I am inspired by that decision because I think it's a great sign of optimism. We're going to begin this summer remediating all the asbestos in the church school wing. And what that means for our life together is that when that project is done, the basement level where the nursery is will continue to be functional and useful and habitable because the asbestos down there was removed some years ago, largely at the expense of the Chancellor Street preschool. On the upper levels, what we'll be left with is bare concrete floors and ceilings. So it will be space that you could carry some chairs in and meet if you wanted to, but primarily will be useful only for storage. And that's where my sense of optimism comes in, that the vestry thought long and hard about, are we really ready to commit to not using that space again in anticipation of a new building in the next few years? And in light of the pandemic, the decision was that this is a good time to give up that space. We're not likely to have large groups of people meeting in small rooms very often, very soon. And the sooner we get that asbestos out of that building, the greater chance we have of doing it in an orderly way. If we were to leave it, what we're essentially doing is waiting for rain to come through the roof and then have an emergency asbestos problem. So in the office wing, we're going to remediate the asbestos in the ceilings and not the floors, because if we think there's a good chance that the offices will be replaced in a new building, we don't want to spend money to put down new floors. And the asbestos is totally stable and inert underneath the carpet. We want to get it out of the ceilings because of the danger of water from the leaking flat roof. So that's the asbestos story. That work will begin this summer. And as part of our preparation for getting out of the upper two floors of the church school wing, Peyton has already enlisted several families to help pack up supplies and take with them their phones and computers so that we can record some prayers in those spaces. It will be compiled, those prayers led by children and families and staff will be compiled into a video so that everybody can see the inside of those church school rooms before the asbestos remediation, and they will essentially amount to prayers of thanksgiving for all the ministry that has taken place in that building, and prayers of deconsecration as we prepare for the next phase of our facilities and our life together. On building renovation and planning, we also want to talk a little bit about the organ. I said in the newsletter that we have an extraordinary organ in that it was designed and built in a way that is more integral with our building than many churches and organs. In other words, the building and the organ were designed and built for and with one another. So where in some churches it might make sense, and this has happened, for example, at Christ Church downtown, this has happened, to buy an old organ and have it disassembled and moved and installed in your space. That is not something that St. Paul's would want to do because our landmark organ is part of our landmark building. And it is due for a thorough and loving restoration, just like the building. So We had anticipated that all of that would likely happen together within the next few years, but we are now exploring the possibility of accelerating the timeline on the organ restoration because we know that one of the conditions of our return to public worship in the near term is that there will be very little, if any, congregational or choral singing. In fact, there will be no congregational or choral singing for quite a while because of the science of coronavirus contagion. So there may be some soloists, but we won't be relying on our organ for congregational singing for what is likely to be many months. And so the reason we're thinking of accelerating the restoration is so that we don't end up coming back and getting through the coronavirus crisis and having a strong, happy, celebratory, vaccinated congregation coming back into a space where the organ is out of use because it's being restored. So we don't have a lot of details on that timeline, but we do know that the most respected leader in restoration of EM Skinner organs, which is what we have, has openings in their schedule for 2021, and we are working out logistically and financially what it would look like for us to try to pursue that project as soon as 2021. The last update I want to give is about Shrinemont. Many have asked whether Shrinemont would open, whether we will have our weekend. The answer is that Shrinemont is open in new and different ways, and Shrinemont would be delighted to host as many of you as would like to come on the weekend we had planned, which is July 10th through the 12th. I will be at Shrinemont that weekend, and any of you who would like to come, we are inviting and encouraging you to make your reservations directly with Shrinemont. So what will be different is we are not planning a weekend's worth of programming. We're going to leave people's activities up to you to do what you're comfortable with doing, to gather in the ways that you're comfortable with gathering, rather than impose programming that expects participation. On Shrinemont's end, they will have all indoor common spaces are closed, so no ballroom, no meeting rooms. But however, the cottages and rooms will be open with, and they will assign St. Paul's guests at appropriate distance related to family groups and private exterior entrances and those kinds of things. And meals are likely to be served at not the dining hall we usually use in the hotel, but up the hill in the old dining hall, family style, so there will be no buffet. And it's uncertain whether they will serve family style to household groups at individual tables, maybe skipping tables, or potentially have meals available to pick up and take with you and eat in the grass or on a porch or at your cottage. All of that is a little uncertain, but they are taking reservations, and I will be there, and I hope that those of you who love Shrinemont and feel comfortable coming will want to sign up. As a gesture of our long support of Shrinemont at St. Paul's, we are planning to make a gift. Shrinemont is down pretty monstrously in their revenue for 2020, as you can imagine, and St. Paul's Vestry has made an offer to match any donations from St. Paul's parishioners by 50%. So you give $100, we give $50, and we're going to do the same thing for Shrinemont reservations. So anybody who wants to come for the weekend, whatever your bill is, we'll top it up by half again. And our hope is that we will be able to, through your donations and your fees and our gifts, that we will be able to come close, if not match, the revenue that Shrinemont usually derives from our weekend when they send us the final bill for our big group, and that's usually in the neighborhood of between $20,000 and $25,000. So those are the large categories of update that I wanted to offer, and I'm going to stop there and take questions. John Reed is going to manage the questions. So if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A. If you want to say who the question is for, you can do that, or you can just leave it to John to read it, and I will either do my best to answer it or pass it to another one of our panelists, including the wardens and some of our staff members. So John, do we have questions?
Yes, we do. The first question, Will, is the Washington Cathedral and others are offering, quote, spiritual communion, unquote, during their Sunday services. Can you explain whether this is an option for Virginia churches and whether we might look forward to this as an offering?
Yes, thank you. Spiritual communion is an ancient and venerable practice. It is not an innovation. There are forms in our prayer book for spiritual communion, for example, for people who cannot swallow in the hospital. So spiritual communion is where you have a Eucharistic service, you consecrate the bread and wine at the table, but then you don't actually consume it. So some churches around the country have been doing this kind of thing most Sundays since the coronavirus began. Some churches have, what I think we will not do is what some other churches have done, which is the 2 or 3 or 5 people who are standing there receive communion and everybody else partakes in spiritual communion. And my view, and I think the ethos of St. Paul's, is that we don't want to divide our congregation in that way, that communion is the mark of our unity and we want to be unified in it. So we will not do communion where some receive and some don't. What we may do is a communion where all of us receive spiritual communion. And we may do that on a special occasion if we are still in this kind of situation, for example, when we get to All Saints Day or something like that. That would be a good liturgical option for us in place of morning prayer. That it touches on something I said early in my update about inclusion. We really want to be mindful of including, when we do get back to our building, we want to include those who are not able to be there with those who are there in person. So that will be a factor in those decisions. Thank you. Do you have another question? John, you're muted.
I do.
Okay.
So we have a question: does the payroll tax forgiveness in any way negatively impact the staff? That is, does this impact their benefits?
I believe the answer is no, but John, I'll let you answer that because you are the expert, and I'll just brag on you for a minute to say that John was the one who did some of the legwork on how this applies to churches, and he was able to share that with the diocese so that other parishes are able to take advantage. The only other thing I want to say about that is that I hope it's clear, but I'll just say explicitly that we have maintained all of our full-time staff, and we intend to continue to maintain all of our full-time staff. And our part-time staff are still with us. Heather's position her responsibilities have shifted, but her hours and her pay have not shifted. Daniel Hine, our music associate, has made a transition from a quarter-time salary basis to an hourly basis, but we've done a great job of not contributing to unemployment. So, but I'll let you answer the technical part of that question.
Great. So the particular program we were talking about is known as the Employee Retention Credit. It is a part of the CARES Act intended to reward operations who were affected by a government order that caused them to be either partially or completely shut down, and also chose to continue to pay their employees throughout. We obviously meet those criteria. It has no effect whatsoever on the employees themselves. We are still receiving pension benefits. We're still receiving health insurance. It literally is a credit received from the government to encourage people in our situation to, in fact, keep their employees on the payroll. So the next question I have, Will, is some of our parishioners have little or no access to computers. Are they receiving written copies of the newsletter? Is there any way we can work with senior living centers to make our streamed services accessible to them?
So what we have done with regard to folks who have limited or no internet access, what we've done so far is to assign Heather, our assisting priest, Reverend Dr. Heather Warren, to make a special effort to keep in touch with those people. So that has been the bulk of her work for the last couple of months, is phone calls and cards. Most of the people in that category are not able, even if they were willing, to receive visitors. So that is a difficult situation. We are just beginning to grapple with how long this has gone and may continue, and so we have not yet established a sort of systematic protocol for providing print newsletters, or something that Heather brought up with me this week was print manuscripts of sermons. But we have talked about, and will continue to move in the direction of doing whatever we can to include those folks in our community, whether it means mailing them printed materials or exploring ways to provide them with iPads or recordings of our services. I wish I had a better answer, but I think that's where we are at the moment on that one.
Okay, the next question we have is, could you tell us how communications with UVA students have been during this pandemic?
I think I'll let Mark answer that question. I'm going to go back to the last question for a quick second, because I just got a chat from Heather Warren herself saying that she has the special edition of the newsletter ready to go in the mail tomorrow for her folks on her list. But the question about communicating with students will go to Mark.
Hey, yeah, sorry, John, could you reread the question? I did not see that in the Q&A.
It came to me as on a text message to my phone, but the question was essentially, how are we communicating with our UVA students during the pandemic times?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the number one way in which that communication is happening is we are meeting every Monday night. We've been meeting, at the start of the pandemic, we were meeting twice a week on Zoom on Mondays and Thursday evenings, and now every Monday night. We drop Thursday after school let out. And so students are tuning in anywhere from 6, 7, or 8 to 20 at one time. And now that the university has announced kind of how it's going to look in the fall, now we can begin some of our recruiting for the fall. So that's the main way it's happening. And that's just the official way. Like but I think it took me a while to realize about college ministry, and I think that what lots of people don't know is that there are 2 channels of communication among college students. There's the official one, like I just said, this is the official thing we do. And then there is a whole lot of conversation and communication going on in a variety of media forms that I don't manage in any way, shape, or form. And they are talking to each other and with each other.
Mark, I wonder if you could say a few words about the plans for kickoff in the fall, given the guidelines that the university has in place.
Yeah, well, that's something that we now have to think through, because one of the main ways in which we've recruited new students is by the activities fair. We go to the activities fair, we set up a booth, try to have a good presence there. But that's not going to happen this year. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, we began to pivot, realizing that the fall wasn't going to look like what we normally thought it would, or what it normally does. And so we're making an effort to have students reach out to all of the incoming UVA students from the 3 dioceses in Virginia that we have connection with. And so we're going to try to communicate with them through official diocesan channels, but also kind of track them down by contacting local parishes and also Episcopal high schools kind of in the Mid-Atlantic area to identify any incoming students and reach out to them personally. So it's kind of a pivot from a general, hey, we're here, anybody who's interested in Christian fellowship can join, to targeting what we have, our channels that we already have for communication in the Episcopal Church.
Thanks, Mark.
Okay,
John,
I'm going to try and merge a couple of questions that are similar. People are asking, can you please give us a sense of how pastoral care for all parishioners is being tended to for all ages? We imagine all clergy and staff are in touch with many parishioners, but we have no sense of what this looks like. In particular, can you tell us what is going on for the children of the parish?
Sure. So I'll answer the first part of that and say that that you're right. The person who's asking that we're in touch with lots of people just by making phone calls. I will say a couple of things that I've noticed that just caused me to feel the disconnection a little bit. One is that where I had anticipated in the first few weeks that I might have more time than I had had in the past to make those calls and check in with people and pick up the phone when somebody's name pops into my head. I have, to my frustration, found that I've got less time to do that. And the other thing that I've noticed in terms of connection and disconnection is, some of you may have noticed it too, we don't have as many prayer requests in our for our prayer list, or people who have died, family members or friends who have died. And so I hope that that is not indicative of parishioners feeling disconnected. But we, Mark and Peyton and I meet every week, talk about the people that we've been in touch with. We've tried to be very cautious about Heather's hours because it's very easy to overspend her hours, and she is diligently focused on staying in touch with a small group of people who are the most isolated. So I'm trying not to add to that, but Heather is, I am in touch with her weekly about those folks and their needs. And the only other thing I would say about that is, if you want some attention, I hope you'll call or email the same as you always would if you don't hear from one of us. And I'd like to go to Peyton for the second part of the question in terms of children and youth, because Peyton has spent an enormous amount of time on Zoom calls with children and youth, but I'll let her tell you about that.
Hello. Yes, I have spent the past couple of months on Zoom almost every day with one of our age groups. It has calmed down now that the summer has started and attendance has dropped a bit, which makes me think and hope that our families are out and about, maybe getting to the beach or being outside together now that school has ended. But it's been amazing, actually. I have felt like I've grown a lot closer with a lot of our children and youth, and a couple of them, a fifth grader, a high schooler, a middle schooler, have all said, I feel like we've grown closer during this time, which has been really, really cool. And I'm grateful to be able to be present with them.
Thanks. John, before we go to the next question, I just thought of something I wanted to follow up on from the question about pastoral care when I spoke about Heather. Heather has also, in addition to staying in touch one-on-one with a number of our most isolated parishioners or our non-internet parishioners, or people who are living alone in facilities where they can't have visitors, she is doing that. She has also become, in many ways, our primary connection with Stephen Ministries. So I don't want to overlook that. Heather has been in touch with Stephen Ministers regularly, and through them, both she and I and the rest of the pastoral staff get updates on how Stephen Ministry is meeting the needs of the parish. So I'm sorry to go backwards, but I don't want to let that go unsaid. I also want to follow up on what Peyton just said a minute ago, which is that I don't know if you could tell because we were doing opening prayers and opening remarks, but Peyton joined the meeting 15 minutes late because she was in a Sunday school Zoom meeting. So she's been very busy keeping in touch with our youth. So John, next.
Yeah. So we have a question that is, can you speak to how the church has been able to maintain its mission focus and its justice work?
Sure. I think the answer to that is twofold. I think we have been able to do it on the one hand faithfully and consistently, and on the other hand not as fully as probably many of us would wish, because it's just such a challenge to adjust to these strange circumstances. One of the most uplifting things that's happened since we closed public worship was our presence on the steps for the march that came from downtown to the rotunda, and many of you participated in that. We had the bells ringing, we had signs, we were passing out food and water to the marchers, and I think that was a great public proclamation of who we think we are. But of course, mission work and justice work is more than public proclamation. It's about getting things done. So in the newsletter, you will find details of some grants that we made early in the hope of helping out some agencies that are meeting more acute needs than in normal times, people that we're already partners with in terms of Haven, Pacham, Impact. Impact had a great win last week with the jail board, something we've been working on with our partner congregations in Impact for a long time. And beyond that, I'm gonna ask Peyton to talk about her experience with organizing the families to turn out for Black Lives Matter, and anything else that she wants to add about the transition into her work with mission and service.
Yeah, so we had a really great turnout for that march. I was amazed. It sort of hit us that morning that the march would be going right past church and that we should be there. And so I reached out to all of our youth and families, and so many people came out for it, which was really cool. And we passed out masks and food and water. And since then, I've been having conversations with all ages about racism and about what's going on right now that have been really fruitful. And I think one of the biggest parts of that work for us is going to be to talk about it. And so I'm looking forward to the adult formation series that Mark has put together, where we will continue to do so. And I am really excited to be doing more with mission and service. It is new for me, so I'm going to be spending most of the summer learning about the organizations around Charlottesville, doing some research, making connections, getting to know people, and hoping to hit the ground running in the fall with concrete plans and steps and a committee and all of those things. I think for now, the work is work of reflection and figuring out where we can invest our time long-term. And we also have this money short-term that I'm excited to figure out with Will and with the vestry and everyone, where we want to send that for coronavirus relief.
Great. So the next question is addressed to Deke, and it is, I'd like to know about the morale of the choirs. The virtual recordings are breathtaking, but it must be agonizing for them to face no in-person singing together for the foreseeable future.
Good afternoon, everybody. And Corky, thanks for that question. And the answer would be yes. On one hand, it is agonizing not to be able to be together. And I think even more so to think about not being together for a long period from now as well. And so it does continue to go on. But I'm also really thankful that we did manage to pull together the virtual choir projects, which didn't bring in every member of the choirs, but it brought in, I think, 99% of the children on those projects, and most of the adult choir as well, the parish choir. And it wasn't the same at all, but it did feel very gratifying to be able to contribute to worship, I think, for the choirs in that way. I think we'll be continuing this summer with a little bit of in-person recorded solos. I've been sort of given the go-ahead to do a distance recording of one singer from the organ or piano at church, and so that will help get us through with special music for the summertime. But I imagine we'll be doing some more virtual choir projects in the fall, another round of those, and it's important to consider that it takes a lot of courage on the part of the choir members to make those recordings by themselves, sort of in a vacuum, but also a lot of time for me and for Matt Lyons, our choral scholar, to put those together, hours and hours just for a 2-minute anthem. But it keeps us busy and feeling like we can contribute in that way, and so we're grateful to do that. And I think I have not, we went through a period of having rehearsals every week for parish choir and junior choir just for a small period after Easter to get these done, but we haven't been meeting every single week since then, because there is that sort of Zoom fatigue that can happen where you're not in person. And so we do check in. We checked in this last Thursday, and most people have done that, and we get a sense of what people are up to and what the concerns are pastorally and things like that. But I think we'll probably have to do more virtual choir projects, at least this fall semester, along with maybe some outdoor distance singing or something like that. So that's kind of where we are.
Great. We also have a question, Will. How are we experiencing the arrival of newcomers in this period of time?
That's a great question. It's been, it is wonderful and inspiring to hear from people whom we don't really know that, I've tuned into your service and I've found some spiritual nurture and some community there. It's very difficult to incorporate newcomers when it's challenging in all times, honestly, to help people who are brand new to our community to feel as though they can claim their place in it. And now, honestly, it's that much more difficult. However, the Spirit works in mysterious ways. We have had we know this, to go back to the financial reports. We know this is working we know this is happening on the basis of gifts and new pledges that we have received. Some of the people that I feel the sort of the worst about are folks who were in our exploration class in anticipation of confirmation and reception. We had quite a few folks who were new to St. Paul's who were participating in that group with me and Peyton, getting to know each other, getting to know some longer time parishioners. And if you're listening, we haven't forgotten about you. I know that some of those folks have been tuning in, have continued to make gifts. And I hope they'll hang in there until they can make more personal connections with more parishioners. But in terms of numbers, the answer is that we are continuing to to welcome new people into our community and fellowship. And in terms of the quality of those interactions, we are seeking ways to be welcoming and inclusive, and it's challenging. We've probably got time for just one or two more, John. We want to finish at 12:15, and if you like this and want more of it, we're going to do the same kind of thing tomorrow at 6 o'clock. But John, do we have one or two more questions?
So I have one more question, and it's related to the Black Lives Matter march we were talking about earlier, and it is a parishioner commenting that they somehow missed the advertising and they were wondering if it was publicized. And I know the backstory, but I thought you might want to share it.
Well, I was going to ask you because I couldn't remember what we sent out and when. I know that our participation was a little bit last minute, partly because I think the march itself was a little bit last minute. But part of why I was so gratified by the turnout was that people pivoted quickly, including youth group families and vestry members on that Sunday, which is now, 3 weeks ago. But John, maybe you could refresh my memory and answer the question about what we sent out and when.
Sure. So the reality was, I think Peyton and Mark were first attuned to this, but it was a fact that Will and I were texting about what to do and how to support this effort the 5 minutes before we started the service that Sunday morning. And then we had a kind of staff call at 11:30 afterwards about how we might participate. Then we set out on the process of trying to make sure that the wardens and the vestry were aware and communicate with them. And at that point, it was a little late for us to try and get something out to the entire parish. I know that Peyton had communicated to all the family list and Mark had communicated with all the students. But in retrospect, we could have done a better job of getting the word out to the parish at large. But it was literally a few days where we were making decisions on 2 minutes notice that were fairly important decisions. So.
Okay.
So I think at this point, Will, we have answered all the questions and we're due to wrap up in 2 minutes. So.
Okay. Well, in that case, I'll use part of the 2 minutes to respond to something that's in the chat, which says, how are you all doing? And I think that refers to the staff. How are you all doing spiritually with this isolation and complete change to your work? And how do you keep yourselves going? So the first thing I want to say is thank you so much for thinking of your staff. One of the, this is going to sound like poor me, but it's not. I intended as the opposite. Last week, I was surprised to hear the bishop say on this call with all the clergy of the diocese that there had been a spike in the Episcopal Church in clergy leaving their jobs, and I found that sad and alarming. But I don't relate to it. I understand that I do. You know, there are days when I feel, and I think some of my colleagues feel that that some of the most rewarding pieces of our work, like being with you all, singing in church, celebrating communion together, have gone away, and that some of what's left is less joyous and delightful. However, we seek joy and delight in other places, and I encounter it again and again in my interactions with parishioners and with the vestry, in terms of the creativity and optimism and commitment that this parish has shown to finding the way forward in unanticipated circumstances. You know, it's forcing us to put our money where our mouth is in that way, because we we never know, we never know what the circumstances are going to be next week, in which we know that God continues to call us to be the church no matter what changes. And this is a pretty dramatic change, but that basic dynamic is unchanged. Last thing I'll say on that is that one of the things that I have found especially nurturing is our new Zoom morning prayer services, which are Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. If anybody out there would enjoy giving that a try, I would encourage you to do it. It can actually really change your day, and it's been a gift, especially to me, because I don't plan it or lead it, and I'm grateful to those who do. I'm grateful for that time in prayer together when we're not physically at St. Paul's in prayer together. So it's now 12:16. Thank you, John, for managing the call. Thank you, staff and wardens, for participating, and thank you to all the participants for joining us for this conversation. We'll close with a prayer. Loving God, we thank you for calling us into your work. We thank you for the great blessing of entrusting us with your work in this parish community. We ask that you continue to bless us, to guide us, to feed us and nurture us as we continue to rely on you to seek the future you have in mind for us. In Christ's name, amen. Go in peace.